I think what is clear today is that there is still, the majority of TVL is still, on ETH. And the L1, not even just the L2s. So, I think the conversation around Ethereum's demise is probably mostly coming from people who have maybe bags of, crypto that, are not ETH and want to bring, more, more eyeballs to, whatever it is that they're holding.
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. Welcome in to another episode of Coinage. I'm the host of Coinage, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studio in New York City. Excited to have you back with us for what is expected to be a huge week, something we're calling our Super Bowl. We'll see how much crypto is discussed, but all 5 commissioners appearing in front of the House Financial Services Committee tomorrow to talk about regulation at the SEC and where they might be wrong. In that, we're expecting a lot of fireworks. Should be exciting, and excited to have on the show with us to discuss that and all the other big headlines in crypto. We got Rob Hadick back on Coinage, general partner at the crypto VC Dragonfly. Rob, good to see you again, man.
Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me on again. This is great.
Yeah, it's you're fresh back from Asia. A lot of conferences. We got Breakpoint and everything else that's going on out there. Token. A lot of headlines coming out of that. So I'm interested to get your take on kind of what it was like there on the ground in a bit. But before we do, want to check in on the action we're seeing play out. And I'd kind of be remiss. We've talked so much about Bitcoin, and that's kind of where we're going to start. But right now, I want to highlight the price of Ether, as Google hasn't updated their price in about 9 days. But the real price, Ethereum moving north of 2,600. The chart looking a little bit more strong there. And on the other side, Rob, when we look at the actual fund inflows, pretty interesting to look at the chart from CoinShares, as we always do to kick off the week, and see that we had another week of inflows when it comes to digital asset investment products. In fact, on that front, we actually saw about $321 million coming in, most of that coming into the Bitcoin ETFs. Ethereum ETFs, though, for the 5th consecutive week, totaling $29 million in outflows. That's 5 straight weeks of outflows. So, Rob, when you look at that kind of macro, walk me through where you think we're at here as we kick off. Getting very close to October. What's your takeaway for where the markets are at?
Yeah, so listen, I think the market is at a kind of this wait and see mode a little bit going into the election. That's obviously the biggest catalyst. But if you zoom out, we're in a place where there's just both exogenous and endogenous bullish things happening, right? Both the Harris administration and, or potential administration and, President Trump are both very, they're talking about crypto for the first time in a presidential election ever. They're both talking about being more thoughtful around wanting to have potential good legislation that's fostering innovation here. Now, we can debate who's better or worse and what that likely is to look like, but it's definitely a good thing that just it's top of mind. Right. The macroeconomic situation more broadly is obviously positive. We're in a place right now where we just had 50 bips of rate cuts last week. We're expecting additional rate cuts this year, 2 more of those, more into next year. Jobless claims look good. Wage growth is back to being positive. Profit margins are up. It's a situation where the macro looks great. And then just more broadly, everything in crypto is trending the right direction. We had Fire Dancer last week get announced on testnet at Breakpoint. We had a lot of bullish new apps that were starting to announce last week. We're just in a situation where, in my mind, there's nothing to be negative about going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it has been interesting to watch all these things play out, and I guess we can dig into what you saw at Breakpoint and Fire Dancer, as that one's kind of been much awaited in the Solana community for quite some time. But the other macro thing, and this is kind of market specific, as we've seen the correlation with crypto and general markets start to grow. On Friday, we got the green light for options trading in around BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. I think that's pretty big to talk about, just because a lot of people are saying this could either lead to more volatility or heightened price moves in either direction. It's something that I think a lot of people have been hoping for, and obviously the options market huge in terms of bringing more money into the space. But what's your takeaway for what kind of something like that? And obviously just getting greenlit by the SEC, there's other checks that need to happen. But if you ask the Bloomberg boys, sounds like those might happen in short order. So what's the effect that you expect to see when these begin trading?
Yeah, so this is great. And this is another thing that we've seen that just further institutionalization of the space, and it's going to bring new participants in. And no matter what you think about volatility, and we can talk a little bit about that, but new participants is good for the price of Bitcoin. It's good for just mind share on our industry. It's good for continued innovation and acceptance. And so that's awesome. I think the likelihood here is that we can see a lot more traders get duration, or they start taking bets that are long dated, out of the money, that could theoretically increase volatility. Now, volatility for Bitcoin has been on its way down, which is typical in a institutionalized market, and a market that has essentially just more efficiency. But with the options in place, actually Bitwise recently put out an article that said they thought there could theoretically be a gamma squeeze, meaning that because of the heightened option volume, there needed to be more, and that option volume likely to be very bullish. Would need to be more essentially market makers going delta neutral and buying spot, which could drive the price up. And there's a bit of a flywheel that happens. So if we saw that, we could see Bitcoin all-time highs in short order.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Eric Balchunas, as I said, at Bloomberg, just looking at his tweet, basically had a 70% chance that this would happen before May, so a little bit late. Other people kind of reacting to it, saying better late than never. But in his estimation, he says it's a huge win for the Bitcoin ETFs, as it will attract more liquidity, which in turn will attract more big fish. So there are those positives, I suppose, to maybe point out when we talk about options trading and those developments. Of course, it hasn't really been, as I said, it hasn't really been the Bitcoin ETFs that have really struggled for inflows, as we just showed in that CoinShares chart. Generally, week after week, it's been those basically being the bulk of whether or not we see inflows or outflows. It just comes down to what Bitcoin ETFs are able to do on a week-to-week basis. But I'm curious to get your take, Rob, in terms of what Ethereum's been seeing, because it has not been as strong. I think there were huge expectations for those. Granted, they were a little bit, no one was expecting them to match what the Bitcoin ETFs did. But even in their own kind of little playground, it has not been good. Now 5 weeks of outflows. I mean, what do you chalk that up to? It just seems like Ethereum's kind of caught in this malaise right now.
Yeah, well, one, they just launched at the wrong time, right? So, in general, like flows and volumes in, late July, August are just bad they're bad for equity markets, they're bad for crypto markets. They're just, people are off, sitting on the beach, like enjoying themselves, etc. So, you would have expected it to pick up a little bit here in September. We haven't quite seen it. I think right now, ETH just struggles with a narrative. There's not really a place where they can tell a simple story. It's really easy to say, hey, Bitcoin is digital gold. It is a commodity. It is a store of value. Like, people get that story. When you talk about ETH, we're still trying to figure out, like, how do we pitch it to institutional investors who maybe aren't on chain. They don't understand what is happening. Is it the world computer? And so I think we need to get into a place where there's a easier conversation happening around what ETH really is, why it exists, why has value capture, and what it's going to mean to the whole space in the future. And I think that would be true of, honestly, any smart contract platform right now if we were to put an ETF out. So I know that the Solana guys are going to be tweeting in the background about how they have a better story, but I think we just need to really refine how we think about this with in these kind of more institutional, less crypto native markets.
Yeah, and weirdly, I mean, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, even though it has, as I said multiple times now, I'll beat that dead horse that we've seen 5 consecutive weeks of outflows for Ethereum. A recent uptick in general, just as kind of all the markets have come back here. Ethereum somewhat leading the way, as are other altcoins, including SWI. I was just looking at that before we came on. It's like up 50% in the last month. It's like a pretty large rally that some of the altcoins are catching right now. Elsewhere, though, Rob, when we're talking about politics, it was interesting to see some of the headlines come out, because right now, obviously, as you said, huge year, huge election year. People are closely watching that race. Still a bit of a toss-up. You got like a 51-47 split right now with Harris in the lead, according to Polymarket. And when you look at some of the headlines, people were praising the fact that VP Kamala Harris came out basically in support. And now you can debate whether or not you should believe any of the things we're hearing at this point in time. But I'll just read the quote, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. But Kamala Harris at a fundraiser in New York saying we'll encourage innovative technologies like AI and digital assets while protecting consumers and investors. We'll create a safe business environment with consistent and transparent rules of the road. Kind of similar to what we've heard before from President Biden and that administration when it comes to protecting consumers and trying to innovate here in the U.S. Some people saying it's just a lot of talk. We still need to see the walk. I don't know where you sit on this, but it does seem like the industry increasingly is kind of coalescing around Trump, given the fact that he continues to talk more and more, was throwing out burgers at PubKey just a week ago, buying burgers with Bitcoin. I mean, I would understand if you sat in the camp of, look, we haven't seen enough yet. And it seems like that's kind of where the crypto industry is at right now.
Yeah, so my opinion is this: like it's a good thing that both parties are talking about crypto. That is a positive. That's new, right? So you mentioned it's not that different from what we've seen out of the Biden administration. Well, the difference is that Kamala herself is talking about it, and not just part of her team, the people within her organization. So that's really positive. I think what it's clear that this year there is bipartisan support for things like stablecoin legislation, FIT 21, SAB 121 that we saw back in May, obviously the ETH ETF. There is support for better and more crypto regulation within both sides of the aisle. I think we haven't seen her do anything yet, and that's the first time we've seen her put digital assets alongside AI as an innovative technology we need to foster, and that's a good thing. Now, there's a lot of talk about Trump, and maybe I'm going to anger some people when I say this, but for as great as it is that he went to PubKey and bought a burger with Bitcoin, which it took him I think like 3 minutes to try to figure out, and then somebody had to step in to do it for him, and all this, like that's great, and it's great that he went out and he said free Ross and that he's shilling a bunch of stuff in his NFTs and everything, but we also haven't actually seen much in the way of any sort of concrete conversation or concrete plan from him around what he would do on the legislative side. We've seen a lot of headlines that people love to see and they talk about and they make for good tweets. But I think both parties need to show us more around specifics around how they're going to approach this space. But no matter who it is, my opinion is we're in a much better place now than we were 6 months ago or 12 months ago.
I would agree with that, and I also do feel like I don't know. It is kind of strange to see, and maybe it's not surprising. It's an election year, so you're going to see everyone kind of come out and talk about this. But as an industry, it has been strange to kind of, if you're going to give, Kamala's camp the tougher line of, hey, you got to really get into the weeds and explain some of this stuff and show us you understand it. I don't know if people have demanded the same as Trump when, to your point, he's basically just going out there and buying burgers and even the DeFi stuff that we've seen from kind of World Liberty Financial is like, okay,
which is just
is this really what we want to?
The whole thing is silly. And so it's unclear. It's like, to me, you can't just give him a bunch of credit for, hey, Barron is out here with a fork of a thing called Doe Finance, and be like, yeah, he loves our industry now. So no, that doesn't, to me, imply anything good for stablecoin legislation in the future.
It's a very good point. I saw you talking about or looking at Richie Torres, another congressman in New York, who's really shown, I think, some appreciation and understanding of kind of what these stable coins are all about. And we'll dig into what's to come in a little bit here for this week, because you got two hearings. Gary Gensler on the Hill twice, not just Tuesday, but also Wednesday. So a lot of questions going to be thrown his way. And we'll dig into that in a second. But before we do, also want to shift over to what we're seeing in the VC space, because obviously that is where Rob Hadick and Dragonfly live. And I think it's important to kind of check in from time to time on exactly where the sentiments are there, because it is an interesting and pretty important bellwether when it comes to kind of what's to come, right? Because a lot of times this funding will unlock the next wave of innovation. And I think shows kind of where the interest is. And you were just in Asia, Rob. So why don't I just turn the question to you when it comes to what you heard at Breakpoint and Token in kind of the excitement? Because a lot of people were surprised. Sounds like people were actually talking about apps for the first time in a while. Normally it's just infrastructure plays. So where do you sit right now in the VC camp?
Yeah, so I do think there is a lot more conversation around apps today in a way that there hasn't been in a while. Like, clearly we have a lot of block space today, a lot of L1s, a lot of L2s. That block space is not being used in the way that we would hope it would have been by this point in our life cycle. And so that conversation is happening. I think, in Asia specifically and around Token and Breakpoint, a lot of the conversation was around, decentralized AI, around payments and stablecoins. Deepin, which people have been focused on for a bit, and then a lot of conversations on what things or new chains can help enable. So things like Hyperliquid, when if they launch their chain, Chain, Monad. But even something like what a Fire Dancer could do for Solana and enabling new apps. But I think the venture side, people are still pretty cautious, and we're still starting to see while that the amount of funding is picking up. I think it was about 5 billion into the space in the first half of the year. Now that compares to 30 billion that happened in 22. So as you can imagine, we're still significantly below that, but it is picking up at a pace, much more quickly than call it the last year and a half prior to this. And so people are excited, but we're starting to see a right sizing that's not just crypto venture specific, but the venture markets more broadly in every kind of vertical other than AI, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to necessarily toot our own horn here at Coinage, but we did have interesting chats with Monad and Chain over the last couple weeks, and Story. So these are like basically the three biggest, I think, raises on the year, or at least up there for a lot of these. And again, all infrastructure plays. Story kind of the outlier there in terms of being a blockchain with a narrative that seems very specific to IP. I mean, is it still the fact, in your estimation, Rob, that like Deepin is basically the space to watch from here on out as kind of people lean into real use cases of this technology? Or are you kind of seeing another kind of category of investments that might catch steam?
Yeah, Deepin is definitely a big focus for a lot of people, and there's no doubt that it's very tangible. So it's really easy to go and talk about it to non-crypto natives, and so people are really excited about that. But the same is true. I actually saw quite a bit of interest in stable coins and payments, and how we can move from just stable coins being on chain to now peer-to-peer transactions, and we've seen a lot of uptick on that especially in emerging markets. And so that's been something that's been really top of mind for a number of different people. I think decentralized AI, we see a lot of developer focus there. So a lot of the best young engineers, they're trying to figure out if there's a place to play there. Now, a lot of the fundraisers we've seen in that space, in my mind, have been more hype than substance. But that is, I think, also true in, call it AI outside of crypto. And so we have to start to see a little bit how that how people coalesce there. I think compute is obviously one part of that has real reason to exist, and has a lot of there, as I would like to say. And then we talked about Ton the last time you and I were on together. I am starting to see more and more people think about putting apps on Ton, so and into Telegram, and so excited to see how that might evolve over time.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that, and obviously when the Telegram news and Pavel's arrest kind of came out, you and I were kind of trying to line up your second appearance back on with us at Coinage, and that was big headlines there. So it sounds like you're saying there wasn't any chilling effect in that, a lot of people had started to talk about decentralization and maybe a premium to projects that didn't have kind of a head of the snake that regulators could cut off. I thought maybe potentially that could see kind of, a surge in prices for projects that were maybe a bit more decentralized. But it sounds like you're saying there was no chilling effect there. It just was people saying, I still want to build on Ton.
Yeah, I don't think it's really changed anything. So, I think a lot of the market got over their skis a little bit with how excited they were about Ton and, the potential link between Telegram and Ton, and which I think is still actually more dubious than a lot of other people do. There's, the biggest apps on Telegram today are trading apps that clear on Solana, not on Ton. And so, it's unclear to me that there's definitely going to be, a really large link between the two. But we continue to see people excited about it and building on it the same way we do for other change. And I think building into Telegram itself will be a topic no matter if it's Ton or any other blockchain, because there are so many users and there are a lot. It is such a kind of a linchpin of the crypto industry.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chart too, and I don't think you can really say anywhere on here. I mean, obviously, it's tough to ever tease out kind of what's moving here because of macro or because of individual storylines. And really, I mean, obviously, Ton has not reclaimed where it was before the arrest of Telegram CEO. But I also think you could say that about a lot of different altcoins too. So I'm not going to try and connect those dots But interesting to see it play out. And obviously, if you believe that thesis back then when you were on last time, when it was trading closer to $7 a coin, probably still like it here at 572. So just kind of interesting to see that all play out. Beyond it, though, Rob, when we're looking at other things to watch this week, this is a big one. And I think it's a big one because, we were talking so much about stablecoin legislation and the idea of regulators maybe starting to wrap their heads around crypto. You could maybe put the Telegram stuff in that camp, even though it happened in France. I'm pretty sure we're going to hear a lot about it from regulators and congressmen and women in this hearing tomorrow. But you're going to have all 5 commissioners on the Hill. This is the first time that we've seen all 5 SEC commissioners in a hearing in Congress since 2019. So it is kind of somewhat unique, but it's going to be in front of the House Financial Services Committee. And Gary Gensler is going to be flanked by a lot of the other pro-crypto commissioners, including quote-unquote crypto mom Hester Peirce. So I think it's going to be interesting to maybe see that the SEC is not a monolith, that a lot of people in crypto who might not like Gary Gensler are going to see how they kind of differ and openly talk about it. It's like a family reunion where you see all the dysfunctionality that your parents have tried to hide from you for years. You're going to see it out there. So what are you expecting to maybe hear? What are you going to be listening for in all of this? Because I think Congress has gotten a lot smarter when it comes to how the SEC should and maybe not overregulate the crypto space. What are you going to be watching?
Yeah, so I'm really hoping to see a lot of conversation around, the enforcement or the regulation through enforcement that's obviously been happening. What's clear is Gary Gensler has been essentially like an extrajudicial cop here. He's been outside of the way of which the SEC was meant to rulemaking, and the courts have continued to say that. They've continued to, and the SEC has continued to lose in the courts because of that. And so, what I'm looking to see is an acknowledgement of that and a goal of trying to rein them in. I think this is actually a conversation that's happening outside of crypto as well. If you go talk to anybody in the private fund space, you go talk to anybody across Wall Street right now, this version of the SEC has been in disarray under Gary Gensler. He's been among the least effective commissioners that has ever been there. We hear things, or I hear things that from other people even outside of crypto, that they've gotten, call it, guidance from 2 different sides of the SEC, from 2 different teams that have actually been at odds with each other and unable to both be essentially to meet both of the specifications that both sides of the SEC have been after. And they've had terrible turnover because the morale is just that low. And so I want to see an acknowledgement that this has been an extrajudicial SEC that needs to be reined in, and that they need to be more thoughtful about how they rulemaking going forward. I don't expect that we'll see any acknowledgement from the SEC itself, but I do expect that some of the members of the Financial Services Committee are going to try to make that point.
Yeah, I was just looking at the kind of the hearing rundown, the memorandum for the hearing. Again, it's titled Oversight of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So as you and I were talking about, it's not only going to be crypto. The SEC obviously touches a lot of different things. The climate policies of the SEC, I think, are also going to be squarely in the crosshairs. But in the memorandum, they do talk quite a bit about kind of the digital asset space and whether or not the SEC is getting that right. So I do think it will be a pretty big chunk of this hearing. And of course, obviously, again, it being an election year, I don't think there's going to be any missed opportunities for congressmen and women to make their points and their positions known. But you've been watching this space for a while, I think, on the regulatory front. And I mean, have you noticed a shift? I was just down in D.C., and it was a very strange kind of situation because on one panel I was talking about remittances and why crypto is so good versus the traditional banking system, and had a congresswoman from Colorado, where Coinage is, registered as a cooperative out there. And it was nice because we all talked about how much this is helping and how much it can help people. And then there was another panel where legitimately for 12 minutes, a congresswoman from Texas came up and basically said, crypto is a big scam and this is used for nothing good. And I was like, okay, I guess these positions can be had and held. But I mean, have you noticed a general shift beyond the FTX collapse shenanigans where basically everyone threw this industry out with the bathwater?
Yeah, no doubt. So there's obviously a desire for many people to learn more. I think a lot of the problem that we continue to have on the Hill is just education. So there's, headlines, people who hear them, they read them, they see things, around, Hamas or whoever else, and they get scared and they see it as a boogeyman. But what we started to see is more and more House reps, more and more people within Congress be willing to listen, be willing to learn, and they've engaged, with the industry in a more fulsome way. They've engaged, with each other and trying to learn. So, people like Cynthia Loomis have been, just stalwarts for the industry in Washington and have been wanting to help teach and bring in, other members of both her party, but even, going across the aisle. And that's been really good to see, which and has me very excited about how this looks and what the likelihood of a passive legislation in the next Congress will be. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but that's my general predisposition. So hopefully we continue to see this type of engagement, and hopefully we continue to see more and more people want to learn and want to understand what is happening. And as that happens, the industry just wants more clarity. They want to engage on the legislative side, and they want to also be able to address the concerns that Congress has, not ignore them. And I hope people continue to understand that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also feel like if we compare the points, again, as a builder in the space and kind of the overhang, it does delay things. It does make things more costly. It adds some confusion. It adds some fear. It adds some sleepless nights for founders who don't want to go to jail or get sued either. And so there is a cost for the entire industry, at least from the founding team side. I do wonder if there's also a cost in your mind, Rob, when it comes to adoption and I guess usage as well, because from companies navigating this whole thing, they might not want to dip a toe or really lean into the space. A couple of years ago, we saw so many companies say, yeah, we want to hold this stuff on our balance sheet. Accounting rules even made that easier. And yet we haven't necessarily seen an opening of the floodgates for a lot of these companies leaning into it. I also wonder on the consumer side, how much of this usage has been impacted too. I'm looking at one of the articles here around Ethereum usage, and we'll just use that as a proxy. I'm not going to say that this is all due to regulation and maybe some of the overhangs there. But when you look at Ethereum right now, I do wonder if, a lot of the waning interest in crypto might be still overhang from the FTX collapse, BlockFi, Celsius, everything else that really did hammer the retail side of this industry. I mean, when you look at things right now, and maybe we'll just keep it specifically to Ethereum here. I mean, when you see usage kind of down on Ethereum, how do you square that with things like Solana, where you're still seeing usage in the Deepin space and everything else kind of still be there? I mean, how do you kind of look at the overall impact to the retail and average user in crypto and say one can be up, one can be down? How do you square those?
Yeah, so I think on Ethereum specifically, you have to take into account that most of those transactions or any incremental transaction has moved to an L2. So if you look at the headlines around Base last week, Base transactions were at an all-time high, right? And I think this is the same user group essentially, right? The Ethereum in and of itself it's hard to onboard new users directly onto ETH. It requires a learning curve. The wallets are not particularly easy to easy to understand how to use. Like people are worried or concerned about losing their private keys. And so having applications, as we talked about earlier, that make getting on chain a lot easier, those are a big way to unlock those additional users. And you mentioned BlockFi and Celsius earlier. Well, that was a way for like really the normal person to say, oh, great, I can invest in or I can speculate on these things in a UX that I understand, and that is normal. And I could also theoretically lend or get liquidity, et cetera. And so Coinbase has done that, and they continue to move into that direction, and they push some of those users onto Base, and we've seen them continue to iterate around Base. And so I think it is not necessarily so much like that a story around people not being interested in ETH versus Solana, but a story around people being interested in or not caring about what the base chain is. The users do not care about what the base chain is. What they care about is their experience. They care about how they get into crypto, how easy it is for them, and what they can do with their money when they're on chain. And so that's really the story here. And Solana has done in some cases a good job of that, and Base and Coinbase are starting to do a really good job of that. We continue to see iterations of companies and protocols across many different chains and L2s start to do that.
Does that fragmentation, though, like as we opened with, in terms of ETH's narrative just being kind of caught in no man's land, the more that that fragmentation happens, is there any coming back from that? Do you think the market's getting that wrong? I mean, I'm seeing a lot of people saying that people are sleeping on ETH in this bounce back once they understand everything you just said, that it's not all doom and gloom. It's just kind of like things moving to other markets. And this is what the whole roadmap was that you would see fees come down and that you would see usage move from mainnet to these L2s. But how do you see that kind of trickling down into token price?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to make token price predictions, but I will say this. I think what is clear today is that there is still, the majority of TVL is still, on ETH, and the L1, not even just the L2s. There is, when you go and look at some of the largest accelerators in crypto, the majority of founders are still, they're still building in ETH ecosystem or EVM ecosystem. There's still a lot of excitement around what can happen in some of these different L2s, whether it's the OP stack and what they can do with the super chain and interoperability. And by the way, right now it's incredibly easy now to spin up a new like OP stack L2 with companies like Caldera and Conduit. And so, my expectation is, and that we continue to see significant amount of building around this space, and that, that story gets easier and more obvious as more applications, come on chain. I think that the conversation around Ethereum's demise is probably mostly coming from people who have maybe bags of, crypto that, are not ETH and want to bring, more more eyeballs to whatever it is that they're holding. And I would expect that we continue to see a lot of competition for those developers, with the EVM ecosystem and Solana and others.
Yeah, perhaps a little bit overblown, as it always is. The space likes to be a little bit spicy this time of year, or any time of year, really, I think is fair to say. But Rob, I think that we hit everything, mostly everything we wanted to hit. I'll always leave room for things that we may have missed. I'm going to come out and say that I still think that tomorrow and Wednesday are going to be the biggest things I'll be watching. We'll be watching here at Coinage. And of course, we'll be taking those hearings live, as we always do on our YouTube and Twitter accounts. Is there anything else you're watching this week, or maybe even beyond it, as kind of Rob Hadick is now back, adjusting back to the Eastern time zone here? What's kind of top of mind for you as you get situated after being out at Token and Breakpoint?
Yeah, so top of mind for me is just I think it's going to be a tremendously bullish back half of the year. So monetary policy is easy, and macroeconomic situation looks incredibly positive. We've seen continued announcements from large corporates around tokenization, from people like PayPal and others that wanted to bring payments on chain. There's just so much excitement right now around builders in a way that I haven't seen in a long period of time. There's all these new L1s launching, like Hyperliquid and Monad and Berachain, and my expectation is that this is inevitable. We're going to win no matter what happens this week, no matter what happens at the election. It's all moving in the right direction, and people should just stay positive.
Yeah, I'm always interested to see when some of that will hit. We've heard the same thing from all the other analysts we've had on, including Sean Farrell at Fundstrat. They've been right more than they've been wrong. Just a matter of when, I think, in this quote-unquote back half of the year. Obviously, everyone would like to see it be sooner. Right now, on the market cap in terms of the overall space, still quite down as far as getting back to that potential new all-time high, 2.82 trillion. We'll see if we break 3. If we believe any of this, we could potentially see that happen by the end of the year if we really do catch that leg higher. But as always, Rob Hadick, general partner at Dragonfly, I appreciate you taking the time to hop back on with us, man. Good luck catching up on the sleep. I know those international flights, never fun, but thank you for hopping on with us, man.
Hey, Zach. It's a great time.
All right, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Coinage. As always, you can check out coinage.media for the biggest headlines in Web3 as we do wraparound coverage per usual and interview the top minds in the space. If you haven't watched our interviews with Berachain, Monad, Story Protocol, all of those are up on the site as well. You can learn a little bit more about those projects and more to catch all the big movers in Web3. Stay tuned. We'll have live coverage from DC coming up later this week. That'll do it for Rob, for myself, for everybody here at Coinage. Thanks again for tuning in.